Usually when we talk about self-improvement, there is this underlying expectation of addition.
Right.
Think about it like building a house. You read a new psychology book and you add a brick of knowledge to your foundation. You practice a new meditation technique and you install a nice, serene window of peace.
Yeah, it feels cumulative.
Exactly. It feels comforting. I mean, we all really like the feeling that we are constantly upgrading ourselves, Like we're advancing to level 2, level 3, becoming a slightly better version of who we were yesterday.
It is entirely an accumulation project. Actually, the entire modern wellness industry is basically built on this exact premise.
Totally.
The idea that you are the architect of your own well-being. You go out, you gather resources, tools, habits, and you construct a more optimized, more resilient you. It gives this really profound sense of control.
But then you step into the world of radical self-inquiry. And specifically, the philosophy we are immersing ourselves in today for this deep dive. When you look at this material, suddenly that whole construction site is just, it's condemned.
Yeah, completely bulldozed.
We are looking at a psychological and spiritual landscape that is, honestly, it's completely terrifying at first glance.
It really is.
Because it tells you that the builder, the you, that is trying so hard to improve and add all those nice new windows, that builder is the actual problem. The architect is the disease.
It is the absolute definition of pulling the rug out from under the seeker.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this right now and you have ever felt that mainstream advice, things like just love yourself or find your authentic truth or manifest your best life.
Oh, the manifesting.
Right. If that has ever felt a bit hollow to you or like a temporary Band-Aid that just keeps peeling off after a few days, this deep dive is going to explain the exact mechanics of why you feel that way.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a massive, incredibly comprehensive document today. It details something known as the Acharya-Prashant framework, or simply the AP framework.
And it is dense.
Oh, very. Our sources today include the core manifesto of this philosophy, complete with this rigorous 40-term lexicon that entirely redefines words you and I use every single day.
Words like love, loneliness, fear, compassion.
Exactly. And before we get into the heavy machinery of how this actually works, we really need to understand the sheer scale of this movement. We're talking about an audience of over 69 million YouTube subscribers.
Yeah, 69 million.
And over 12 million on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, this is not some dusty, obscure manuscript hidden in a cave somewhere.
Well, not at all.
This is a colossal modern phenomenon that is resonating with tens of millions of people globally right now.
And the reason that scale is so fascinating to me is because this framework does not pander. It really doesn't hold back.
It's brutal.
It is. It draws deeply from ancient traditions like Advaita Vedanta, which we will definitely explain in a bit.
Yes, we will get there.
And also Buddhism and Western existentialism. But it carves its own incredibly sharp, uncompromising path. It is explicitly not designed to comfort you. The source material states very clearly that this framework is a mirror.
A mirror.
Right. And a mirror doesn't care if you like your reflection. It just shows you what is exactly there.
Exactly. So our mission today is to strip away all those feel-good cliches. We are going to deconstruct the popular, comfortable ideas of self-help and modern mindfulness. We're going to look into that mirror, and honestly, there is no fluff here. It's just a radical redefinition of who you actually are.
It's a total paradigm shift.
So let's start right at the foundation. Okay, let's unpack this architecture of the self, and specifically the ego. Now, in pop psychology, we usually treat the ego as a bad habit.
Yeah, like a character flaw.
Right, like you get a little too arrogant in a meeting, or you get super defensive when your partner criticizes how you load the dishwasher, and people say, oh, that's just your ego acting up.
Guilty as charged.
All right, we treat it like it's a software glitch, a bad program you downloaded from society or maybe from strict parenting or something.
That is the conventional accepted view. We treat the ego as a purely psychological construct, a conditioned response that we can eventually unlearn if we just, go to enough therapy sessions or say enough positive affirmations in the mirror.
I am enough, I am strong.
Exactly. But the AP framework completely demolishes this idea right out of the gate. It states that the ego is a physiological fact.
A physiological fact?
Yes. It is present at birth. It arises simultaneously with the physical body.
Now, I really struggled with this when I first read it. Because wait, if the ego arrives with the body like a built-in biological feature, Aren't we just doomed from birth?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It makes it sound like we are carrying a congenital defect that we can never actually cure. If it's biological, how can we possibly fight it?
That is the most natural resistance to this idea. It feels totally fatalistic at first, but we really have to understand what is meant by a physiological fact here. The body is not a blank slate.
Yeah.
It carries millions of years of evolutionary baggage. When a newborn arrives, it brings with it deep biological tendencies, survival mechanisms, spatial awareness, and a basic boundary that says, this is my body. That is the outside world.
Okay, that makes sense. You have to know where your hand ends and the fire begins.
Precisely. So the ego, according to this framework, is simply the felt sense of I am. It is the centralizing force of the biological organism.
Okay.
But the turning point, the tragedy of the human condition, really, is that this felt sense of I am is simultaneously a felt sense of lacking.
The defining condition.
Exactly.
The framework says the ego's fundamental, unspoken mantra from the moment of birth is, I exist and I am incomplete.
What's fascinating here is how the text separates this from psychology. The radical shift here is understanding that this incompleteness is not a psychological wound.
It's not trauma.
No, it wasn't inflicted by a bad childhood. It wasn't caused by a society that tells you you aren't rich enough or pretty enough. Incompleteness is the ego's very definition.
Wow.
The ego does not become incomplete through damage. It is incompleteness itself.
Think about that difference. That is huge.
It changes everything.
If you start from that single premise, that you are structurally built to feel like you are missing something, that everything else in human behavior makes absolute terrifying sense.
Every single thing.
Every war, every desperate romantic relationship, every late night online shopping spree where you think, a new pair of shoes will finally make me feel whole.
Because it is trying to fill a hole that is structurally unfillable.
The text uses this concept of scaffolding, which I thought was such a vivid way to picture this.
It's a brilliant analogy.
Think of the ego as an essentially empty, condemned building. It has no actual substance of its own. It's just a hollow I am. So what does an empty building do to keep from collapsing?
It looks for support.
Exactly. It steals materials from the outside world to prop itself up. It reaches out into the environment and grabs a name. It grabs a reputation.
A nationality.
A college degree, a political affiliation, a gender identity, a career title. It bolts all these external things onto its hollow frame and defends them to the death as me.
Notice the extreme vulnerability in that setup, though.
Oh, yeah.
None of that material is actually generated by the ego. Every single piece of scaffolding, your intelligence, your opinions on foreign policy, your social status, it is all borrowed.
Stolen, really.
Stolen, curated, claimed, and then fiercely defended. And why is it defended so fiercely? Because if that scaffolding is challenged, the ego doesn't just feel a little sad or embarrassed. It feels like it is literally ceasing to exist. It faces annihilation.
Let's ground this for a second. Imagine you were listening to this right now on your commute, and you deeply identify as a top performer at your company.
Okay, that's your scaffolding.
That is a major piece of your scaffolding. Now, if your boss calls you into the office and tells you your work has been slipping, your heart rate spikes.
Immediately.
You might start sweating. You feel an intense rush of anger and defensiveness.
Yeah.
But think about it. Your biological organism is perfectly safe. Nobody is holding a weapon to your head.
You have food, you have shelter.
Right. But you feel like you are fighting for your life. Because to the ego, that performance review is a literal wrecking ball hitting the scaffolding.
That is exactly the mechanism. The biological threat response is hijacked by this hollow center trying to protect its stolen identity.
Hijacked. That's the word.
And this leads directly to one of the most mind-bending interventions this framework makes, something that completely shatters the way most of us approach self-awareness. The framework insists that you cannot observe your own ego.
This one kept me up at night. I mean it. Because in modern spirituality, what is the most common instruction you hear?
Observe your ego.
Right. Observe your ego. Watch your ego without judgment. Notice when your ego is reacting. We are told to step back and just be the watcher. But the framework points out a massive self-referential error here. The observer is the ego.
It is the ultimate illusion of distance. When you say, I am watching my ego get angry, you are implying that there is this pristine, separate, enlightened you standing off to the side, wearing a lab coat, clinically evaluating the messy, egoic you.
Like you're immune to it.
Exactly. The AP framework argues that there is no such separation. You are the ego. The I that is uttering the sentence, "I am watching my ego," is the false I playing a trick on itself.
It's like a flashlight trying to shine a beam of light onto its own bulb. It physically cannot do it.
That's a great way to put it.
Or it's like a knife trying to cut itself. When the ego tries to evaluate itself, it is using the exact same broken instrument that produced the error in the first place.
Right. Both the claimant and the judge, both the observed and the observer, are the exact same illusion.
It is a closed loop.
A completely closed loop. You think you are spiritually bypassing your ego by analyzing it, maybe journaling about how ego-driven you were today, but that journaling is just the ego enjoying a new, highly sophisticated form of scaffolding.
Oh, wow. So the journaling is just the ego saying, look how spiritual I am now.
Exactly. Now it has the scaffolding of being a self-aware spiritual person. It didn't disappear. It just upgraded its wardrobe.
Okay, so if the ego is this physiological fact, this built-in error of incompleteness that claims ownership of the body, props itself up with borrowed scaffolding, and can't even be looked at directly without playing tricks.
That's a lot.
It is. So how does it actually operate day to day? How does this invisible error hijack our biological hardware to survive? To understand that, we really have to look at the machinery of the mind.
Right, the hardware.
Because this philosophy makes a massive distinction between the brain's natural state and what the ego does to it.
To understand the hijacking, we first have to understand the innocent machine itself. The framework has a highly mechanistic, almost clinical view of the natural mind.
Innocent machine. I like that.
In its uncorrupted biological state, the mind consists of two very basic functions. First, you have memory.
Okay.
Memory is just an inventory of objects you've encountered. Fire is hot, water is wet, this berry is poisonous.
Basic survival data.
Right. Second, you have intellect. Intellect is the processor. It's the ability to calculate relationships between those objects in memory to keep the biological organism alive and well.
So it's an innocent machine.
Yeah.
The mind itself is not an agent. It doesn't have desires. It doesn't cling to the past or resist the future. It is as emotionally neutral as a liver or a lung.
Yes.
I find that comparison so helpful. You don't accuse your liver of having bad intentions when it filters toxins. It's just doing its biological job.
Right. And you shouldn't accuse your mind of having bad intentions when it processes data. The mind is just a biological instrument. But from the moment the ego arises, it commandeers this instrument.
It takes over the controls.
Memory stops being just a neutral functional database. Instead, the ego forces memory to selectively store and distort events that suit a specific narrative. Suddenly, memory is used to build a story of victimhood or a story of grandiosity, and the intellect stops just processing objective reality. It starts running frantically in whatever direction the ego commands.
And working for a new boss.
The mind becomes a slave to the ego's feeling of incompleteness.
You know, this is actually a massive relief to understand.
Why is that?
Because it means thought is not the enemy. Anyone who has ever tried to meditate has probably felt like their own thoughts are these hostile invaders they have to silence.
Oh, absolutely. The monkey mind.
Right. You sit there and suddenly you're thinking about your grocery list or some embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago, and you get so mad at yourself for thinking. But thought is just neuronal activity.
Yes. The problem is never the thinking itself. The ego is not a product of thought. The ego precedes thought.
Wait, say that again. It precedes it.
Yes. It rides the thought. It steers it. When thought is liberated from the ego's grip, it is simply intelligence. It's just the body and brain processing reality without a false, needy center demanding that the universe serve its specific storyline.
So if the mind is a totally neutral computer hard drive, the ego is a virus that takes over the operating system.
That's a perfect analogy.
The hard drive isn't evil. The processor isn't malicious. But the virus forces the whole machine to mine cryptocurrency for an external source. The ego forces your intellect to mine the world for validation, for security, for scaffolding.
That is exactly how the mechanics work, and this virus dictates exactly how we experience our own physical bodies, which leads us to a critical distinction the framework makes between feelings and emotions.
Oh, this part is huge.
If you want to understand the exact mechanics of human misery, this is the master key right here.
Let's really dig into this, because distinguishing feeling from emotion completely shifts how you experience a bad day. I mean, we use the words interchangeably, but they aren't the same, are they?
Not at all. According to the framework, feelings are purely physical.
Physical?
They are biological responses produced by the body reacting to stimuli, a sudden tightening in your chest, a flush of heat in your face, a contraction in your gut, a surge of adrenaline.
So just nervous system stuff.
Exactly. These are just bodily events. They are weather patterns, and like weather, they pass on their own. If you leave a physical feeling completely alone, it simply arises, peaks, and dissipates as the nervous system regulates itself.
But we never leave them alone.
Never. Because the ego swoops in the millisecond that physical sensation occurs.
The virus activates.
Right. The ego appropriates that raw physical feeling and converts it into an emotion.
And how exactly does it do that?
It wraps the physical sensation in a story. It charges it with identity. And by doing so, it maintains the sensation indefinitely. So that temporary biological tightness in the chest. The ego claims it and says, "This is my anxiety. I am an anxious person because the world is too much for me." The heat in the face becomes my righteous outrage at how I was treated. The contraction in the gut becomes my eternal heartbreak.
So what does this all mean practically? It means pain is a physical reality, but suffering is entirely manufactured.
Yes.
Pain is just sensation at the level of the body. But suffering is what the ego builds out of that pain. Suffering equals physical resistance plus a story plus an identity.
That is the exact formula.
It really reminds me of the old Buddhist parable of the second arrow.
Oh, right.
The first arrow is the physical pain, like you get hit, you can't avoid that. But the second arrow is the one you shoot into your own chest. The story of, why me? This always happens to me. The universe hates me. I'm ruined.
The AP framework maps exactly onto that dynamic, but it grounds it deeply in physiology. Let's look at another paired concept the text dissects: caution versus fear.
Oh, I love this one.
It perfectly illustrates the mind hijacked by the ego. Caution is the innocent, egoless response of your physical system to a genuine threat.
Like swerving a car. If you are driving down the highway and someone suddenly cuts into your lane, you don't even think about it. Your hands grip the wheel, you slam the brakes, your heart pounds in your ears. It's pure biology keeping the organism alive.
Exactly.
But then 30 seconds later, the danger is gone. Your heart rate settles, your breathing normalizes, and you just keep driving.
That's caution. It responds to the immediate present reality.
Exactly. Caution is reality-based. Fear, on the other hand, is always the ego scrambling to protect its scaffolding.
Always.
Fear is an ego-level response, not a body-level one.
Yeah.
Let's say you post something online and you lose 100 followers.
Tragic.
Or someone questions a deeply held political belief of yours at a dinner party. There is zero physical threat to your organism. Your liver is fine, your lungs are fine, your life is not in danger.
But the alarm bells in your head, the physical panic, they sound exactly the same as if a tiger was actively chasing you. Because to the ego, it is an existential emergency. Remember, the ego is made of borrowed scaffolding. If you lose a piece of that scaffolding, like your reputation as an intelligent person or your social standing, the ego experiences it as a literal loss of self.
Kid thinks it's dying.
It does. Caution passes because the physical threat passes. Fear persists, often for years, because fear is responding to what might happen to me in the hypothetical future. The ego lives in terror of being exposed as empty.
The ego is a virus constantly running threat detection scans on the hard drive, looking for absolutely anything that might invalidate it.
Constantly.
But this raises a massive question. What is the underlying fuel driving this frantic, restless movement?
That is the core question.
Why does the ego care so much? What is the energy source powering all this suffering? And this brings us to what I found to be the most shocking, counterintuitive twist in the entire framework.
It's a big one.
The paradox of love, desire, and loneliness.
It requires a profound paradigm shift to grasp this. Because when we think of love, we think of romance. We think of deep affection for a partner or a child. We think of a warm, positive emotion.
Of course we do.
The AP framework states unequivocally, love is not a feeling. Love is not an emotion. Love is the ego's very constitution.
Wait, let's pause on that. The ego, this structural error, this virus that hijacks the mind, manufactures suffering, and defends its fake scaffolding to the death, is literally made of love.
Yes.
I had to read this section 3 times. The framework says the ego is a born lover. Because the ego is fundamentally incomplete, it inherently dislikes itself.
It hates its own emptiness.
And that deep structural dislike drives a desperate attraction toward its own dissolution. It wants to end. It wants truth.
Yes. The ego's intrinsic restlessness, its constant agitation, is love. It wants to end its own painful separation and wants to dissolve into completeness.
But it doesn't know how.
Exactly. Because it operates in a dualistic illusion, meaning it sees itself as separate from the world, so it fundamentally misunderstands how to find that completeness.
It looks outward.
Always outward. It thinks, if I just get that perfect job or that perfect partner, or if I move to a new city, or if I get $1 million, I will finally be complete.
And here is where it gets incredibly profound. The framework says that the desperate man reaching for a body in a bar at 2 in the morning and the spiritual seeker reaching for enlightenment in a monastery at 2 in the morning are powered by the exact same engine.
The exact same fuel. The direction is different, but the force is identical. Every attachment, every desperate desire, every addiction is actually love.
Wow.
It's just love misdirected. It is love sent to the wrong address. Desire is not the opposite of love. Desire is the ego's love reaching outward for imagined completion in objects that can never, ever satisfy it.
Because no object can fix a structural absence.
Exactly.
It's like trying to fill a black hole by throwing stars into it. The black hole just absorbs them and stays exactly as empty as it was before.
It just gets heavier.
Right. You get the promotion, you feel good for a week, and then the emptiness returns. You get married, the honeymoon phase ends, and the emptiness returns. And this perfectly sets up the text's brilliant, really devastating distinction between loneliness and aloneness.
They're completely different concepts here.
Can we break down the dualistic nature of loneliness first? Because we use these words interchangeably, but they're worlds apart.
Loneliness in this framework is a purely dualistic state. Its entire structure relies on separation. I am here, something else is over there, and I crave that something else.
So there has to be a me and an it.
Yes. Only the ego can experience loneliness. The ego exists at one end of the spectrum, and the desired object, a person, a status, an experience, is at the other end. And between them stretches this agonizing, vibrating ache.
And the framework insists that no acquisition, no person, no amount of money can ever close that ache. Because the ache is the two. The ache is the gap itself.
Exactly.
As long as there is an I that wants a that, there is loneliness.
Precisely. If you are operating in a subject-object duality, the gap will always remain. This is why you can feel profoundly lonely in a crowded room or profoundly lonely while lying in bed next to your spouse of 20 years.
Which so many people experience.
Now contrast that with aloneness. In common language, we think aloneness just means physical isolation, sitting in a room by yourself.
Right, like a hermit.
But the framework defines aloneness as a non-dual state.
Let's clarify non-dual for anyone who hasn't stumbled down a philosophy rabbit hole recently. Non-dual basically means not two. No separation between subject and object. So aloneness isn't just withdrawing into a cabin in the woods.
No, not at all. Aloneness is the momentary dissolution of the craving subject. The ego looks back at itself, sees its own falseness, and for a moment, it dissolves.
The E drops away.
Yes. When one end of the duality is gone, when the I vanishes, two do not remain. The ache of loneliness vanishes instantly. Not because you found a partner to fill the gap, but because the you that was experiencing the gap is momentarily absent. There is only the present reality with no center claiming it.
So if love is actually the ego's frantic drive to dissolve itself, and true aloneness is the temporary success of that dissolution,
Yes.
then how do we achieve it permanently? I mean, is it like a movie where we meditate on a mountaintop for 10 years, have a sudden magical moment of enlightenment, the heavens open, and then we float through the rest of our lives never experiencing suffering again?
Ah, the dream.
Right. This brings us to the framework's incredibly sobering and strangely beautiful news about the illusion of arrival.
This is where the framework separates the adults from the children in philosophical terms, really. Because the ego is fundamentally tied to the living physiological body. It will persist until the body dies.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, there is no permanent enlightenment for a living human being. There is no final destination where you plant a flag on the mountain and say, I am now perfectly dissolved forever. I have won.
I have to admit, my brain fought this idea hard.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Because the text explicitly says there are no stages of purification. But every spiritual tradition I know has stages. The ego loves the idea of a spiritual ladder. We want to say, I'm a level 5 enlightened being now. I used to be a level 2. I hardly ever get angry anymore.
But the framework says that is just upgrading the scaffolding.
Exactly. It's just the ego playing a highly sophisticated game of dress-up.
The operational core of this philosophy is that dissolution is continuous. It is a moment-to-moment reality. You look at yourself honestly, the ego collapses momentarily in the light of that fierce honesty, and you experience aloneness.
Okay.
But the next moment, because the body still breathes, the blood still pumps, and the biological engine still runs, the ego resurrects. It comes back. It reforms.
So there is no peace treaty. There's only a continuous war. You have to wake up every single day and see through the illusion all over again.
Yes. But the cycle itself is described as the very essence of the spiritual life. It is not a failure when the ego returns. The process is momentary disappearance, a slightly weakened revival of the ego, the hunger of love returning, honest effort, a deeper disappearance, and a thinner return.
It gets thinner over time.
The tendency to fall back into deep delusion diminishes over time through this constant daily friction, but it never reaches absolute zero while you are alive. The war is the life.
And this completely changes how we define completeness. I want to highlight this because it runs counter to almost all mainstream New Age spirituality you see online today. Usually, we are told that beneath our damaged ego, there is a hidden, sparkling, pure, true self.
An inner light.
Right. A reservoir of boundless positive energy just waiting to be tapped.
The AP framework deals exclusively in absences. This is what philosophers call the via negativa, the negative way, describing something by what it is not. Completeness in this framework is not a positive state of inner fullness. You are never full. There is no hidden treasure chest of divine light buried under your childhood trauma.
Completeness is simply the absence of the one crying about being incomplete. That is so stark. There is simply, momentarily, no one there who is empty.
It is a radical void. And this brings us to their definition of joy. And joy is a word we throw around lightly. But here, joy is not peace. It is not contentment. It is not a pleasant, relaxed mood you get after a good yoga class or a massage.
Wow. The text calls joy the ego's party at its own funeral.
It's quite a phrase.
I have to pause on that? That changes the entire goal of spirituality. You aren't trying to achieve a state of peace. You are actively celebrating your own obsolescence.
Yes.
Joy is the last experience of the experiencer witnessing its own dissolution. It's the ego looking at reality, realizing it is completely unnecessary, and rejoicing in its own death.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why time and death are framed with such intense urgency in this text.
Time and death.
Time, according to the framework, isn't a clock ticking on the wall. Time is not physics. Psychological time is literally just the ego's friction-filled movement from one unsatisfying object to the next.
Like reaching for the next fix.
Exactly. You get a car, you're bored of it, you want a new job, you get it, you're stressed by it, you want a vacation, you go, you want to come home. That constant reaching for the next thing is time.
Which means, without the ego's restlessness, psychological time stops. There's only the present. But physical time keeps running. The biological clock is marching toward death.
And the framework is brutally honest about death. Death is not liberation.
This is a vital point where the framework diverges from a lot of comforting religious dogma, doesn't it?
Oh, drastically. Many traditions treat death as the ultimate release of the soul into a higher realm, a final reward. This framework says death is merely the dismantling of the physical body, and therefore the dismantling of the ego tied to it.
So the ego ends.
Yes, the ego no longer suffers. But it also means the potential for joy. That active, celebratory funeral party is gone. Death is unconscious cessation. It closes the window permanently.
It makes life incredibly urgent. Honest seeing must happen now, not because death is a scary enemy or hellfire waits you, but because death ends your only opportunity to actually see through the illusion.
It's a deadline.
It's like the universe gave you one short window to wake up from the dream while still inside the dream, and death just unplugs the TV.
Exactly. The wisdom effort is strictly for the living. You cannot be liberated when you are dead, because there is no you left to realize the liberation.
This urgent, absence-focused, continuous war sounds completely alien compared to the self-help books on our nightstands, and even different from the ancient philosophies we usually hear about.
It really is its own beast.
If permanent enlightenment is impossible, and the ego always resurrects, that completely shatters the promises made by almost every mainstream spiritual teacher today. Let's look at why this framework argues that paths like Neo-Advaita or modern self-help are actually dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it takes no prisoners here.
It is deeply respectful of its roots, particularly Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism, but it insists on correcting what it views as fatal misinterpretations that have crept into modern practice. Let's start with classical Advaita.
Okay, for those unfamiliar, classical Advaita is a school of Hindu philosophy that emphasizes oneness. It talks a lot about pure consciousness or the witness.
Right.
The idea that behind the ego, there is this vast, non-dual, universal awareness that is just peacefully watching everything unfold.
The AP framework categorically rejects this. It states that consciousness is inherently dualistic. Consciousness requires an ego at one end and an object of consciousness at the other. You are always conscious of something.
So you can't just have consciousness floating in a void.
Right. There is no consciousness without that structure. Therefore, if the ego dissolves completely, Consciousness as we know it ceases. There is no residual pure consciousness hanging around watching the void. The witness disappears with the witnessed.
And it goes even harder against Neo-Advaita, the popular internet gurus sitting on white couches who say, you are already enlightened, there's nothing to do. Seeking is the problem. Just relax into the present moment and accept everything.
Yes, the framework sees that as a highly dangerous, toxic bypass. It argues that while the ego is ultimately an illusion, it is an illusion with severe, devastating material consequences.
It hurts people.
Exactly. The ego destroys lives, it destroys relationships, it hoards wealth, it ravages the planet. Telling it a deeply egoic, destructive mind, you are already enlightened, there is nothing to do, just feeds the ego's ultimate fantasy of effortless superiority.
Oh, the ego would love to hear that.
Of course. The ego requires daily, active, continuous war. You cannot just relax into the present moment if your present moment is dominated by a virus.
It also pushes back on Buddhism, specifically the staged paths. It agrees completely with the Buddhist diagnosis of suffering, the concept of dukkha.
Yes, that part is totally aligned.
But it rejects the idea that you can walk a neat, eightfold path of gradual purification to achieve permanent nirvana. Because, again, the ego is physiological.
It's not just bad conditioning you can train out of a dog with enough treats and discipline.
Right. It's the operating system of the meat suit you are currently wearing.
This raised an important question for me when analyzing the text. If traditional spiritual paths are dismantled as either impossible or dangerous, what happens to the modern secular religion of self-help?
Oh, this is the ultimate takedown. If the self is the dysfunction, then modern self-help is a catastrophic waste of time.
Absolutely.
Think about all the goals we set: building confidence, learning to love yourself, finding your authentic voice. The framework says all of this is just upgrading the scaffolding while the rotten structure remains completely untouched.
It's putting a fresh coat of premium paint on a condemned building. You are just making the disease stronger.
Let's look at the concept of confidence specifically. The lexicon at the end of the framework defines confidence as the ego's painkiller for its own insecurity.
We treat confidence as a virtue, usually.
We do. But the text points out that confidence and fear actually share the exact same structural flaw. They both depend entirely on external validation.
Confidence is fear in fair weather.
That line is a total gut punch.
It really makes you stop and think.
Think about it. When everyone is clapping for you, when your boss praises you, when you get lots of likes on a photo, you feel confident. When they stop clapping or they criticize you, you feel fear.
The weather changed.
Right. But in both states, you are still completely enslaved to the clapping. You haven't solved the underlying problem of dependence. You're just enjoying a temporary high because the weather happens to be nice today.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps most practical question. If we can't rely on self-help or comforting beliefs or staged paths of purification, how does this framework instruct us to actually live our daily lives?
How do we relate to other people who are suffering, for instance?
Let's ground this in a very real scenario. How do we treat people who are hurting? The framework makes a massive distinction between compassion and mercy.
Usually we think these are the exact same thing, being nice to someone in pain. Imagine your friend comes over, sits on your couch, and is crying over a breakup. They're saying, I'm unlovable, they treated me so badly, my life is over.
The framework makes a razor-sharp distinction here. Mercy validates the sufferer while trying to reduce the suffering. Mercy sits on the couch and says, oh, you poor thing, you have every right to be angry, they were terrible to you, the world is so unfair.
That's what a good friend is supposed to do, right?
Well, mercy is well-intentioned, it wants to soothe, but it leaves the suffering, the ego, completely intact. In fact, it actually reinforces your friend's story of victimhood. It builds their scaffolding.
Whereas true compassion is fierce. The text says compassion sees the sufferer as unreal. It refuses to leave them in the comfort of their fiction.
Exactly. Compassion doesn't console the suffering. It sees right through it. It addresses the reality beneath the ego. It might say, you are suffering because you tied your entire existence to this person's validation. Look at what you are doing to yourself.
Wow, that is tough love.
But the text warns that no compassion is possible without self-knowledge. You cannot see through another person's ego if you haven't done the brutal work of seeing through your own. Otherwise, you're just an ego lecturing another ego.
It totally redefines what a good friend or a good teacher is. The teacher who shakes you awake isn't cruel, even if it feels incredibly jarring at the time. And the friend who constantly validates your self-pity isn't actually helping you. They are enabling your virus.
They're giving the addict more drugs.
This uncompromising lens is also applied to how we spend our free time. Let's talk about entertainment.
Oh, this one is convicting.
It hit me personally. If you are listening to this right now, think about what you do when you have 5 free minutes.
You pull out your phone?
Instantly. The framework says that scrolling on your phone, binge-watching shows, playing video games, it isn't harmless leisure. It isn't just laziness or unwinding. It is flight.
Flight from what?
Flight from silence.
No.
Because in silence, the ego's deep structural incompleteness stands starkly exposed. When you are quiet, when there are no distractions, you feel the ache.
You feel the unfillable hole.
So you grab the phone to dump cheap data into the mind's machinery, forcing the intellect to process absolute nonsense like dance videos, arguments on social media, just so the ego doesn't have to face its own void.
You are running from yourself.
Constantly running.
The ego fabricates story and hurt in the present moment as its lifeblood. The text is very clear on this. The past does not exist. No hurt exists in the past.
Wait, unpack that a little. No hurt in the past.
Right. If you feel hurt right now about something someone did to you 10 years ago, it is because your ego is actively manufacturing that hurt right now in the present moment to maintain its identity as the wronged one.
Which totally changes the concept of forgiveness.
Completely.
Real forgiveness isn't some noble, high and mighty decision where you stand there and say, I graciously pardon you for your sins against me.
That's just more ego.
Exactly. The text says true forgiveness is just a natural consequence of seeing through the illusion. The identity of the wronged one simply dissolves when you see your own ego. There's no one left to hold the grudge. The scaffolding falls away.
So we arrive at the ultimate question. What is the method? How do we actually apply this framework on a Tuesday afternoon when our boss yells at us or when we feel lonely?
What's the practice?
Right. What is the practice if it isn't sitting on a cushion meditating or doing mindfulness exercises or going to therapy?
The text says there are no calming techniques. Calming techniques just put the ego to sleep temporarily. It prescribes one thing, and it calls it the most intimate form of violence.
Intimate violence.
Yeah.
The willingness of the ego to look at itself with the exact same ruthlessness it has always reserved for judging the outside world.
It is the ego catching itself in the act of being the ego.
Imagine you receive a passive-aggressive email. You feel the physical flush of anger. You feel the immediate desire to defend your scaffolding, to draft a furious reply.
We've all been there.
Instead of riding that wave of emotion, you turn the spotlight inward. You watch the machinery turning. You see the virus trying to hijack the intellect.
You catch yourself.
Yeah.
And in that precise moment of catching, the blind conviction of the ego fractures just a little bit. It loses its grip.
But the text is clear. It is not serene. It's called intimate violence because it goes against every single biological survival instinct the body has. You are essentially starving the centralizing force of your own organism.
And the kicker, you have to do it again tomorrow.
And the day after.
Every time you get triggered. For as long as you breathe.
A fraction repeated across a lifetime of honest engagement is the only liberation that has ever been real. That is the reality the AP framework presents. It offers no consolation, no safety net, only the hard, daily, relentless work of honest seeing.
Let's pull all of this together and summarize the incredibly intense territory we've covered today.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. So the ego isn't a bad psychological habit. It's a structural error, born with your physical body, defined by an unfillable sense of incompleteness. It is driven by a twisted, misdirected form of love that we experience as desire and fear.
Right.
It constantly dodges the silence of its own void through cheap entertainment, and it hides behind the very self-help tools we use to try and fix it. The only way out isn't a magical state of permanent enlightenment, but a continuous daily war of intimate violence, catching yourself in the act of being false.
And this brings us right back to the premise of the AP framework as a mirror. The text explicitly notes that the teacher, whether it's a person, a dense philosophical book, or this very deep dive you are listening to right now, only holds up the mirror.
That's all we're doing.
The teacher's only job is to show the ego to itself. You, the listener, must decide what to do next. You must decide whether to look deeply into it, endure the intimate violence of seeing your own falseness, or to break the mirror, turn on a movie, and go back to sleep.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a mind-bending implication extrapolated directly from the text. Something for you to ponder on your own, maybe while you're driving or doing the dishes later.
Oh, this is a good one.
The framework states, and I quote, "No ego means no consciousness means no universe. because an unspoken of universe is an unexisting universe.
If you take this philosophy to its absolute logical conclusion, that is a staggering epistemological claim.
Right. So if we follow this logic, if every single human being on Earth were to successfully and permanently dissolve their ego at the exact same moment,
If all the scaffolding fell away.
if everyone achieved perfect aloneness simultaneously, would the physical universe itself simply vanish?
Wow.
Is the ultimate act of spiritual liberation actually an act of complete cosmic erasure?
A fascinating and completely terrifying question to end on.
It really is. It's like realizing that the house isn't just condemned, but that the ground it was built on was a projection all along. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that the mirror is always right there in front of you. Catch you on the next deep dive.